Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning service, which everybody is attending virtually. Everybody has to stay at home, but due to the beauty of technology we have, you can watch on YouTube this morning. My lesson this morning is entitled A Tale of Two Shames. And our text that we will be looking at this morning is Luke chapter 15, verse 11 through to 14, otherwise known as the parable of the prodigal son. Now, unfortunately, because we live 2,000 years distant from what actually happened here, there are many things that we do not always understand from this parable. This is a parable of the recovery of a lost son, intended to demonstrate the recovery by God of a lost sinner. But the story goes further and it identifies the nature of repentance. The story tells us of three characters: the younger son, the father, and the older son. The story opens with the story of the younger son, and there are two things that we will look at this morning. The first one is a shameless request, and the second one is a shameless rebellion. Verse 11, a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me a share of the estate that falls to me." We call this younger son the prodigal son. It's an old English word that we don't use much today. It basically means a spendthrift, somebody who is wasteful, someone who is senselessly extravagant, self-indulgent. And the younger of them says to him, "Father, give me my share of the estate." He's likely not married. He's probably in his teens and he wants to go out and sow his wild oats. And he's utterly disrespectful to his father. In a culture where honor is so important, in a culture based on the 10 commandments, honor your father, honor your mother, which is at the top of the social list. And then the son makes such a request. It is tantamount to wishing his father was dead. You see the way it worked. The children only got the inheritance once the father had died. And that's the way he treats his father. Almost basically saying, "Father, I wish that you were dead." Now this would be disgraceful to the family. It would be a serious breach of the family. And when you go back to verse 24, the father says, "This son of mine was dead." In verse 32, the older brother says, "This brother of yours was dead." It was even customary at that time to hold an official ceremony and a burial, a funeral, if you will, for such insolence. And his request, "Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me," means the property. He's asking for the stuff, the land, the animals, the buildings. And in a two-brother family, this would have been divided unequally. The older son gets double what the younger son gets. So in other words, the older brother gets 2/3 of the estate, and the younger brother gets 1/3 of the estate. So whatever is 1/3 of the estate is what the younger son wants. Now obviously this was a wealthy family. They had servants, as we find out later in the story. They hired musicians and dancers for the party. And they had servants besides the normal servants they had in the family. It was a wealthy, pretty well-off family. And here comes the first surprise in the story in verse 11. He divided his wealth between the two sons. He extends to the son the freedom. And this is God extending freedom to the sinner, willing to endure personal agony, the agony of rejected love. The sinner has no relationship with God whatsoever. He doesn't love God. He doesn't care about God. He wants nothing to do with God. Wants nothing to do with the family of God. Wants no accountability to God. He doesn't want to submit to God. He doesn't love God at all. He just wants to get out. And God, in the agony of rejected love, lets the sinner go. He lets him go. So firstly, we have the shameless request. And that brings us to the shameless rebellion. Verse 13, not many days later. He didn't wait long. He couldn't wait long. He's been in this relationship long enough. He wants to get away from the family. He wants to get away from the father. He has no love for the father, has no love for the brother, and the older brother has no love for him either. And as a footnote, the older brother has no love for the father either. In fact, when the boy comes home and the father is happy to celebrate and kill the fattened calf, the older brother is angry. He is equally unloving, equally ungrateful, even though he stays at home. He is a hypocrite in the house. So the father basically has no relationship with either son. So these are two kinds of people who have no relationship with God. One is religious, one is irreligious. One is so far away from God, and one is so close to God. But what did the younger son want? Money, cash. He wanted to sell the property. Once it had been given to him, he could sell it, even though the father still had oversight of the property and could get interest of it. The younger son wanted money. So how was he going to sell the property if his father still owned it and he couldn't give it away until his father had died? There was a loophole in the law. And basically he could sell the property as long as the person didn't take it until the father had died. Now you would ask the question, how on earth would somebody do this? Why pay for something now and only take possession of it later? And that is a thing that we do today still, and that is called future commodities. You buy something now at a set price, and then later you take possession of it hoping that it had gained in value. So it was a pretty simple sell. Buy the property now, give the son his money, and only take possession of it later when it would have gained value. His property can be sold, which means the buildings, the lands, whatever it was, the younger son gets his cash now, and the person who bought it from the younger son only takes possession of it once the father has died. This is the foolishness of the sinner. He wants to get away from God. He wants to get away from God now. He wants no accountability to God. He sells cheap all the opportunities that God has provided him, all the good gifts, all the gospel opportunities, everything that's good that God has put into this world. Verse 13, he went on a journey into a distant country. Distant country is the operative word. Get out fast, get out far. And a Gentile land would be as far as he could go. Any country outside Israel would be classified as a Gentile land. And verse 13 goes on to say, and he squandered his estate with loose living. Squander means to scatter, to throw it away, to live recklessly, wasteful, a dissipated, debauched, dissolute life. Hence the word prodigal. In fact, in verse 30, his older brother says he devoured his estate with prostitutes. Now, some people think this was a trumped-up accusation by the older brother. But in the story, there is no older brother. This is Jesus telling the story. And this would be an accurate reflection of what he wants to convey that the young man in fact did. And this young man represents open sinners, the rebels, the immoral, those who make absolutely no pretense of faith in God, no pretense of love for God. But sin never works out the way it looks. Verse 14, now when he had spent everything, and that kind of introduces us to the fact that this guy arrives in the far country, he's a fat cat, fair-haired boy, the new guy in town with a big bankroll. He comes into town, he sets himself up on the party trail, and he goes on a wild spree, surrounds himself with riff-raff and scum and the low-lifes, and very soon he runs out of money. Verse 14, spent everything. Now that's his fault. But a severe famine occurred in the country. That's not his fault. That's how life is. Some things in life are your fault and some things are not. But the conflux of these things is devastating. And life is like that. We don't know what a severe famine is. We don't know what it is like. We're talking about a level of desperation that's beyond anything that we can even begin to conceive of. Now, some of the decisions he made were bad, and some of the circumstances made the situation even more severe. Have you ever watched a movie where something goes wrong, and then something else goes wrong, and then something else goes wrong, and everything that could possibly go wrong in that movie and at that scene goes wrong? Now that is what happened to this young man. He spent all of his money, and a severe famine occurs in that land. Everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong for this young man. So from a wonderful place with a loving, generous father, he comes down to this. He has nothing left, no family, in a foreign land, nobody to turn to, all his resources are gone. But he's still not ready to go home, still not ready to humble himself. So he does what people do when they hit bottom. It says at the end of verse 14, he began to be in need. For the first time in his life, he can't supply his needs. And this is the beginning. Verse 15, like typical sinners, he comes up with a plan. This is his first plan. This is plan A. And he goes and he attaches himself to a citizen of the country. The first thing he says is, I've got to go get a job. I've got to go pick myself up. I've got to go get a job. And this is typical of a sinner. He runs away from God, goes out, lives a dissolute, rebellious life, sins up a storm, winds up in the pit, winds up with absolutely nothing, with a life that is completely bankrupt, completely bare. He's got nothing left but to pick himself up. So he went and he hires himself out to one of the citizens of that country. Citizen refers to a privileged person, a wealthy person. In verse 15, the citizen sends him out to feed swine out in the field. This isn't really a job. It is the lowest thing that he could do. The citizen probably just did it to get rid of this young man who was begging and pleading with him. And he sends him out in the field and he says, okay, go feed my pigs. This isn't really a job, as it turns out to be, and it doesn't pay anything. So this is a Jewish boy feeding pigs in a Gentile land. But that's not all. Go to verse 16. What else can he do? When he gets there, he longs to fill his stomach with the pods that the swine and the pigs were eating. He was so hungry that even feeding the pigs was not enough. Earning wages was not enough. He was trying to eat their food, and he had to fight them for it. And this is the greatest tragedy that we'd ever consider, that we could ever conceive of. the greatest rebellion, the greatest breach, the greatest waste of life, the greatest waste of an opportunity. He's starving to death. This is desperation. This is a sinner, poor, hungry, hopeless, trying to get a little pig slop, nobody to help him, nobody to pity him. So what is the lesson here? What do we get out of this? The lesson is that sin is rebellion against God the Father. Sin is shunning all responsibility, all accountability. It is denying God his rightful place. It is tantamount to hating God. It is not to love him at all. It is to dishonor God. It is to take all the gifts that he has surrounded us with in life and to squander them as if they were nothing. And then the foolish sinner has exhausted plan A. I'll fix my own life. I'll go to psychology. I'll take drugs. I'll take alcohol. I'll go to some self-help group. I'll move to a new neighborhood. And when all of that stuff is gone, the sinner wakes up at the bottom. And that is where this young man is. He's wasted everything in his life. All the money that he got from selling his father's estate. He has got nothing left. He's got no friends left. He's exhausted his plan to go and work for money. He's rock bottom. He has nowhere else left to go. And that is where we were. We were once this young man. Squandered all our wealth, squandered all the opportunities that God has given to us, wasted them on nothing, tried to make our own plans to get out of the situation that we are in, and then finally coming to the realization that we need God. Let us close with a word of prayer.